Good afternoon. It's Monday afternoon, and Walter and I are here again. Walter being my ghostly friend. He's over to the one side of me here. And we're talking about the book, Where's the Rest of the Body? We're well through a large part of the book. We've reached the place where Nancy Featherstone, who chopped her parents into pieces, has finally tricked into returning to Canada to collect an inheritance, and they now have her locked up in the jail in Chaseford, A.K.A. Stratford. So what's next? So far, she's been kind of a strange person. Well, I guess anybody who chops up their parents is kind of strange to begin with. But what I mean by that is when Chief Petrovic and his constable Herman took her into custody down in Hamilton, she was bananas. She screamed most of the way back, and that's a long ride from Hamilton back to Stratford or Chaseford. And finally, when they got her into the jail in Chaseford, and she was then handled by two different people, one of them being Joel and the other being his friend Jay Jarvis, she suddenly was much politer, as if a switch had been flipped. So this is a few days later, and I've got the manuscript here, and I'm looking at it, and Chief Petrovic says it's been more than 4 weeks or 4 months since the first body part came to our notice, and at the beginning it seemed like an impossible case to deal with. They had bodies, parts that turned out to be from a significant time in the past, and they didn't know where they were going to go with this. This was a murder that had been committed many years ago, so it was a cold trail to follow. So anyway, they followed it up, and they finally, as I said earlier, arrested Nancy Featherstone. And as he says, aside from her confession when she was high on drugs, when she talked to Johnny Polizzi and Ernest Stanzio, or a couple of hoods from Chicago, we have very limited evidence on which to connect her to these murders. So he's sitting in his office talking to his constables. And then he says, remember, we've seen two very different sides of her personality. On Wednesday, when she was arrested in Toronto, they had to put her into restraints and carry her out and deposit her in the rear of our car. And it was all that Constable Herman and I could do to put up with her screaming all the way home. That's the person that murdered not only her parents, but also Henny Allenby. And of course, Nancy tried to adopt her new persona, calling herself Henny, because she had purloined all the information that Henny had been carrying with her, and that's who she used to identify herself in the U.S. As you're aware, we have not interviewed her yet, and she will only speak to us about the charges in the presence of her lawyer. Now keep in mind, she's also a wealthy woman from the U.S., and so she's hired the best criminal defense attorney in Ontario. His name is Fred Donaldson, and he's supposed to arrive in Chaseford later that afternoon, and he'll be there at 1:30 for the interview. So now we're going to proceed to that part of the story. So here now it's 1:30 in the afternoon. 4 people sat at the table in Chief Petrovic's office. Constable Herman and Chief Petrovic sat on one side of the table, and across from them sat the lawyer Fred Donaldson and the accused Henny McCann. The chief and the lawyer had agreed that the chief's office was the best place to conduct the interviews. Fred Donaldson, the lawyer, further stipulated that no one else could be present in the interview room except for the recording secretary. So Sherry Simpson, Petrovic's secretary, is there as well. Sherry understood she was legally bound by the rules of confidentiality and could reveal nothing about the interview. She was seated at a small table at one end of the room where she was visible to all 4 participants. Petrovic started the interview by asking the accused to identify herself. "I'm Henny McCann, an American citizen from Springfield, Illinois," she said. "Was your maiden name Henrietta Harriet Allenby?" asked the chief. "That was my maiden name. I identified myself using that name at the law office of Wilson, Tone and Johnson on Yonge Street in Toronto. I have papers that prove my identity. I'm eligible for the inheritance." Chief Petrovic ignored the last couple of comments. He didn't want to upset the woman. He suspected that if he did, she would become irrational. Before he could ask the next question, Chief Petrovic was interrupted by the lawyer. Donaldson opened his briefcase and pulled out a newspaper clipping. It was a copy of the notice that had been put in the newspapers under the title "Missing Heir." "Is this inheritance legitimate, or was this notice just applied to entrap my client?" he asked. The chief looked at Donaldson and said, "It is a legitimate inheritance from the estate of Harold and Marion Featherstone. They were a prominent local family. We also wanted to speak to your client about a murder investigation that we are conducting." Now back to Donaldson. He says, "Well, then I think arrangements should be made so she can obtain her rightful inheritance. Then she can leave your jail, leave Canada, and return to her home in Springfield, Illinois." "Oh, I don't think it's that straightforward," said Chief Petrovic. "There seems to be some doubt as to whether she really is who she claims to be. We're not certain she is Henny McCann." "That's preposterous," said the lawyer Donaldson. "I've looked at the identification. All it says is she is Henny McCann, wife of the former prominent surgeon, Dr. Frank McCann of Springfield, Illinois." The chief looked at him and said, "Well, I have 2 sworn affidavits from American citizens that she is Nancy Featherstone, who was born nearby, just outside the town of Chaseford, A.K.A. Stratford, Ontario." As soon as he said that, that's when the screaming started. Henny jumped up, sprawled across the table, put her hands around Chief Petrovic's throat, and got a hold of one of the chief's ears with her teeth. It was chaos. Sherry Simpson started screaming. Donaldson and Constable Herman each took one of Henny's hands and pulled them from around the chief's neck. They tried to get her to release the chief's ear. All of a sudden, there was a tremendous loud bang! Henny screamed and let go of the chief's ear. When she did, the chief backed away with his ear damaged, but still attached to his head. There was a temporary lull, and Henny continued to scream, "You're all evil. I will make you pay. I will get you all. You'll all pay with your lives." These phrases were interspersed with profanities and other garbled sentences that no one could understand. By the time the other 3 constables were in the room, they had managed to get Henny's hands away from, get them behind her back so they could handcuff her. "Sorry for discharging my firearm in your office," said Constable Smith. "There was some minor damage to your window from the bullet, but I thought the noise might startle everyone here and give us a chance to intervene." Henny's full volume rant continued as she was removed from the chief's office and taken down the hallway to her cell. Petrovic sat still at the table, carefully touching his ear. Most of it was still there. I said most. Sherry Simpson was leaning against the filing cabinet in an apparent state of shock, and the lawyer Donaldson was now quite pale and momentarily speechless. In his office 5 minutes ago, a formal interview was being conducted in a routine fashion. Now people were sitting there in a state of disbelief. Constable Herman escorted Sherry Simpson from the room. As they were leaving, the chief said, "I think you should take the rest of the day off, Sherry. See how you feel after the weekend, and if you can't return Monday, let me know." Then, alone in the office were Chief Petrovic and the lawyer Fred Donaldson. "I was hoping this wouldn't happen," said Petrovic, "although I thought there was a chance it could. Constable Herman and I have seen the woman in this state before. It can last for hours. You really can't communicate with her when she's like this. When she becomes normal again, you can easily talk to her. It's like she's two different people." Donaldson cleared his throat and said, "Henny paid me a very large retainer. I will continue to represent her, but this outburst of abnormal behavior requires that I do some research. She definitely needs medical attention. I will contact a psychiatrist I know, and then either he or someone can come and visit her. But I'm finished here for the day, Chief. I'll get in touch with you later." Well, that ends today's story. I hope you've enjoyed it. This woman, Nancy, Henny, whoever she is off her rocker.